Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Friday. It is the 21st day of March, 2025. And as always, the headlines keep rolling in, so let's look at them. Now, our first headline is a response to a story we did on our first Breaking News today. And that is, if you recall, the Defense Minister Katz said if Hamas does not turn over the hostages soon, we may start annexing parts of Gaza, just taking over them. Well, the U.S. State Department today was asked about that, and they basically said, look, it's a distraction to talk about annexing Gaza. Didn't say yes, didn't say no, just said we're not going to talk about it now because it's a distraction with everything else going on. So we'll look at that story. Now, supposedly, here we go again. Egypt has put forth another bridging proposal, and we're told the U.S. was sympathetic to it. Hamas has yet to respond, but Israel said, well, we've heard nothing about it. And of course, it's the Sabbath right now, so we won't hear anything about it for about another 24 hours. Now, our next headline is really interesting. You might have heard about what happened to Heathrow Airport late Thursday night. There was a huge fire, and they're still not back to working. The flights are not still not coming in. UK terrorism police are probing sabotage in Heathrow's airport fire. They're thinking maybe Vladimir Putin and the Russians are to blame. So we'll talk about that possibility. Khamenei, the leader of Iran, said again today that the Houthis act independently, and he warned again against U.S. strikes on Iran that we will respond to them. Now, how coincidentally, and just like clockwork, what did we have? Well, we had another Houthi missile that's been launched against Israel today, Friday, that makes three in 2 days. So it's never a dull moment, is it? Okay, let's go to the headlines. Headline number one, the State Department says it's a distraction to talk of annexing Gaza. This is from the Jewish News Service. Talk of annexing Gaza is a distraction. The emphasis of the moment ought to be on Hamas's use of human shields and the general chaos that causes, said U.S. State Department on Friday. Tammy Bruce, spokeswoman, was pressed several times on talk of annexation after Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, said on Friday that he has instructed the Israeli Defense Forces to seize additional territories and to expand the security zone around the Israel-Gaza border through permanent, get that again, permanent Israeli control of the territory if Hamas keeps refusing to release the hostages whom it holds in Gaza. Bruce issued a lengthy response to the question during the department's press briefing and asked a reporter to hold on as she explained the State Department's thinking on what ought to be the current emphasis. For those of you who care about these issues, it is a distraction to move past the nature of what's going on right now, via with one cause, which is what is Hamas's attitude and actions, while we have to deal we have to deal with what is continuing and what is not happening because of their choices. In other words, we're not going to talk about it. We're continuing to try to stop Hamas from doing what they're doing. It's interesting if we can continue to keep basically our minds on this. And so, bottom line is, you wouldn't answer the question. But what's interesting about all this, the question was obviously asked because we knew it would be, and didn't say yes, didn't say no. Basically, as they kept trying to interrupt her and talk and ask her specifically about it, she said, our focus right now is what's taking place in the present with Hamas using the people again as human shields. And so we're getting ahead of ourselves here. So anyway, that was really interesting that they had that response. In other words, they didn't say yes, didn't say no, just said we're not going to talk about it now. So we'll see. Now, at the end of the day, it should be up to Israel what they decide to do, not the United States. Donald Trump has basically said, we'll let Israel make their own decisions here. And recall what we talked about earlier today. Gaza was given in the early 2000s to the Palestinians to build their own paradise there, and they basically have ruined it since they took over and voting in Hamas the year after they got in there to be the leader of the Gaza enclave. And of course, Hamas and their charter has in it the destruction of the nation Israel. It's one of their goals. And so that's why we've had problems ever since. So anyway, interesting to see if this annexation does come to pass. In other words, and people have suggested this in the past, that if they're not going to give up the hostages, and every day Israel just make the Gaza territory smaller and smaller and smaller permanently. So we will see. All right, we have another headline here. Egypt puts forth a bridging proposal. Hamas is yet to respond. Now, this report comes from a Hezbollah-affiliated newspaper, and they've alleged that Egypt would take who is, we had that story also earlier today, would take in 500,000 Gazans on a temporary basis. Now, a Palestinian official speaking on condition of anonymity, this is a Reuters story, told Reuters that Egypt also put forward a bridging proposal that Hamas has yet to respond to. The official declined to provide details of the plan, which he said was under consideration. Two Egyptian security sources said that Egypt had suggested setting a timeline for the release of the remaining hostages alongside a deadline for a full Israeli pullout from Gaza with U.S. guarantees. Well, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be a full Israeli pullout from Gaza in any way, shape, or form. A Palestinian official speaking on condition of anonymity told Reuters they put this proposal forth, but again, Hamas, they said, has yet to respond, and they declined to provide details of the plan, which said was under consideration. Now, Egypt could take in Gaza, we know that. This is what Trump said earlier. Both Jordan and Egypt should do that. And this story, interestingly, comes after the wake of that story we talked about today that El-Sisi, when he was talking with the Arab leaders recently, offered to take in 500,000 Gazans temporarily while Gaza is being rebuilt. So this is interesting. All this is coming at once. Now, how true this story is, we don't know. It could be more fake news. And so we've got another website, Israeli website, claiming they've never heard of this. They know nothing about this. And of course, since it's the Sabbath, the Shabbat, you won't have anything for 24 hours. There's no news. So I guess they'll try and run with this story. And then come tomorrow night, Israeli time, Israel may or may not respond. They certainly will on Sunday. But is it fake news? Well, what we do know, Israel seems to be bent on continuing to fight and only negotiate while the fighting is still going on, not to have some other ceasefire, and certainly not to do one of these deals that they'd talked about earlier. What Witkoff had, basically said, here's the U.S. proposal. You can get 5 hostages back, but you got to have a 50-day ceasefire. And in the 50-day ceasefire, Palestinians get more terrorists released from their Israeli prison. The humanitarian aid just flows into it. And of course, Hamas can regroup. That does not seem to be a possibility anymore. But we'll see. Stranger things have happened. All right. Well, again, we'll have to wait till tomorrow evening, Israeli time, to know anything. Now, headline number 3 is really interesting. You might probably heard the story about the huge fire at Heathrow Airport. This really stopped the flights for basically an entire day. Well, the UK terrorism police is now probing possible sabotage. Experts warn, it's the New York Post story, by the way. Also, UK Daily Mail has it, and everybody seems to have this story. Experts warn it bears the hallmarks of Russia, Russia, Russia. It's more than coincidence. British counterterrorism police are reportedly probing whether sabotage is to blame for the huge fire near London's Heathrow Airport. As some experts warned on Friday, the inferno had all the hallmarks of a Russian plot. The raging fire, which broke out at an electrical substation about 2 miles from the airport late Thursday, knocked out power to Europe's busiest hub, forcing the cancellation of more than 1,300 global flights and disrupting travel for some 291,000 passengers. As investigators scramble to determine a cause for the blaze, which is expected to cause disruptions for several more days, fears mounted that Russian President Vladimir Putin could potentially be to blame for the chaos. The Metropolitan Police said that while there was currently no indication of foul play, detectives were retaining an open mind and that its terrorism command would lead the probe. Meanwhile, experts were refusing to rule out foreign bad actors. University of Buckingham professor Anthony Glees told LBC that Britain's spy agency, MI5, was likely all over this to weigh whether the fire was a Kremlin-sponsored attack. We are obliged to think about Russian military intelligence being involved in something as serious as this. It's a very serious hit on our critical national infrastructure, and that we should suspect the Russians and their surrogates being responsible is in itself an indication of the success of Russia's subversive activities in the UK. Now, it could be a coincidence, but bearing in mind that we have more than 585,000 electrical substations in the UK, why this particular one should explode does seem to me like more than a coincidence. Well, will we find out the answer? Who knows, but we'll keep looking at this story. Okay, headline number 4. Here we have it again, Khamenei from Iran. And they're singing the same song, and he said it again today. He said the Houthis act independently, and he warns against U.S. strikes on Iran. Iran Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei said Friday that the Houthis, an Iran-aligned terror group that controls much of Yemen, act on their own motivations after U.S. President Donald Trump said he would hold Tehran accountable for the group's actions. And if you recall earlier in our first edition of Breaking News today, Trump said he's going to obliterate them, basically blow them to kingdom come where they won't exist anymore. And so, as we'll see in a second, the Houthis' response was to send another missile to Israel tonight. Khamenei also warned if U.S. or anyone else commits any malicious act against Iran, it will receive a severe blow. Iran is not capable of this right now in any way, shape, or form. He said that in a televised speech Friday night in Iran, echoed by officials, this social media post. Trump said this last Monday he would hold Iran responsible for any attacks carried out by the Houthis as the American military carried out waves of strike against the group, marking the biggest U.S. military operation in the Middle East since he returned to the White House. Also, too, there's a story, another headline, that we're told that Israel's told to hold back. And even though the Houthis have attacked him now 3 times, as we'll see in our next story, in the last couple of days, just stay out, but let the U.S. take care of this. So that's interesting also. Now, the Houthis, whose slogan calls for death to America, death to Israel, and a curse on the Jews, have fired 4 missiles at Israel since Tuesday, all of which were intercepted and none of which caused any casualties. The group resumed its attack on Israel after fighting resumed in the Gaza Strip amidst the collapse of a hostage ceasefire deal with the Hamas terror group. Americans said Khamenei on Friday made a big mistake and called regional resistance centers Iranian proxies. What does proxy mean? Have to give this guy a dictionary, I guess. The Yemeni nation has its own motivation, resistance groups in the region, which have their own motivations. Iran doesn't need proxies. Well, again, Iran finances the Houthis, gives Houthis the weapons, directs what they're doing. So this is, again, a bunch of nonsense. So basically, while Khamenei tries to distance himself from the Houthis, there is another Houthi missile launch against Israel, like we just said, late Friday. That's the 4th one this week and the 3rd in 2 days. The Israeli Air Force intercepts Houthi missile that triggered sirens in Jerusalem, the surrounding areas. This is from the website Virtual Jerusalem. Now you got to remember something too. The first one was 5 in the morning. The second one was late in the afternoon. There's one late in the evening. There's 2 today. And basically, it's triggering sirens in Jerusalem. And can you imagine the feeling? Because you don't know when you hear this siren, the whole country hears the siren, and you have to hit the air raid shelters. And when you have it twice happening, and this 3rd time this week, 2nd time today, after a 2-month pause, it is very psychologically, distracting. So red alert signs sounded across Israel from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and surrounding suburbs due to a ballistic missile that was fired from Yemen Friday night. The missile was accepted by the Israeli Air Force before it crossed Israeli territory. According to the Magen David Adom statement, no injuries were reported. He said they targeted Ben Gurion Airport with a Palestinian 2 hypersonic ballistic missiles. So we got 3 missiles in 2 days. They're certainly not taking seriously Trump's threat of obliterating them. And so the stories just keep on coming with Israel and Hamas still in the spotlight. Russia also in the headlines, as well as Iran. You really can't make this stuff up. These headlines continue to confirm who Scripture says will be the main players at the time of the end in that part of the world. So, again, our website, Educating Our World, we want you to go to that for the full documentation on what the Bible says is going to happen. We have 12 books on Bible prophecy, including 25 signs. We're near the end, and look up a timeline of 50 last days events. All of our material is free, including all the books, 65 books you can download in PDF form, all of our videos there. Download them from we have an app too, by the way, I should mention, EOW with Don Stewart, Educating Our World with Don Stewart. You can get that for free at the various app stores. But the bottom line is we have all this information for you. It's all free of charge. Please take advantage of it so you can know from the biblical point of view what's going to happen next and what's going to go on. We certainly are excited about that because we see the end game as far as God is concerned, the second coming of Jesus Christ to the world, and many events we're told will precede it. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Probably nothing else for tonight, but tomorrow morning again, God willing, we'll be doing the next breaking news. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless you.